kind of interesting. Really disturbing, kind of beautiful, but really interesting. This is one of the best books I've ever read. A sentence I never thought I would say. Hello, creeps. Andy here, and today I've got an interesting book to talk to you guys about. I read this book originally for a different video, and after I was done, I said, oh my goodness, we have to talk about this immediately. So I put everything else on hold just to make this video and talk to you guys about this book. So this is by Gabrielle Whitcop, and this is the book. I will mention the title later on, but I don't know if you guys know this, but the first few minutes of YouTube videos, you have to be kind of careful of what you say. But YouTube, if you're watching, this is just a literary breakdown of a book. That's all this is. This isn't for any other purpose. But that being said, there are obviously some disturbing things in this book about people who have relationships with people who are not alive. So if you're sensitive to that kind of stuff, particularly if it has to come with children or things like that, this might not be the book for you. We're not going to be going into detail about any of these things at all, so keep that in mind. But this is one of the best books I've ever read. I don't know what that says about me, but you know me, I like to dig under the surface and see what the book is actually trying to say, and I think that in a way it is really messed up, really disturbing, but also kind of beautiful. And as equally messed up as it is, the language is very beautiful. Like, it is written very beautifully. So we got a lot to talk about. Let's just dive on in and talk about this book. So this was written or published in 1972, and it is labeled as erotic literature, but also transgressive fiction. But can I tell you one thing that bothers me? I don't like when people leave comments on my videos and say this isn't a horror book when I'm talking about it to an audience of people who love horror or in relation to other horror books. There are absolutely elements of horror in all sorts of books. Even Jane Eyre has some creepy, spooky, supernatural stuff in the book that I would consider part of the horror genre. So when I'm talking about books like this, they are disturbing, and no, they're not horror books, but I do think that horror audiences, particularly those people who enjoy more extreme horror or disturbing horror, would really like a book like that. So not a horror book, but also definitely, I think, for a horror audience if they like disturbing stuff and they like to dig under the surface. But obviously it's going to be messed up given the title of the book. So, you know, do your own research and all that. But we won't be going into crazy detail in this video. Another cool thing is that this book is such an experience just reading it that no matter how much I quote the book or how much we go into it, I can't ruin the read for you. Sometimes I can, you know, there are plot points or whatever that can be ruined, and I'm not going to give away the ending or anything like that. So I'm just going to be going through and tell you some interesting things that I found in here, read you some quotes, but I won't ruin this for you. So if you do enjoy the books that I like, you do enjoy more disturbing things, you're okay with more disturbing things, and you like messed up stuff, but you also like more meaning, I honestly can't recommend this book more. This was such a great book. Okay, so let's get started. What is this about? It's about a man. We don't find out his name until like near the end of the book, but his name is Lucian. And it's written in journal-like format, and it's really his, you know, journal of the disturbing stuff that he does. That's really how the book is read. And you get about a year, a little over a year of his life. Okay, let's start with just a messed up quote from the very beginning. So his first victim, although he doesn't see them as victims, but you know, obviously we are functioning adults, so we can all agree that they're his victims. His first victim is a young girl, and this is on the first page. It says, the whole body is still a bit stiff, a bit clenched, until the heat of the room softens it like wax. It's truly a very beautiful dead girl. There are so many quotes in here that are gross and messed up, but I do think, and we'll talk about one particularly towards the end of the video, where it's not really the over description of what's happening that's messed up. The writer, Gabrielle, just has such command over language that the more messed up parts are the more symbolic parts, or the parts that you can analyze a little bit further. So although there are parts in here and sentences in here that make you go like, oh, this is too far kind of thing, it's not 13 pages of just descriptions of what he does to a body. It's more like a sentence or two, but the meaning behind what's being said is more disturbing than what's actually being done. I hope that makes sense. Okay, this first victim that we have here ends up vomiting a black stream of mysterious liquid onto him, and he says this little girl quickly stopped pleasing me, and he didn't mind separating himself from her. But he ends up feeling guilty afterwards, and this is kind of a constant with him, is he sees these bodies not as belonging to dead people. He speaks of them as if they are alive, as if they are sending messages to him. So I'm going to read you this paragraph right here. So he's already grossed out by her. She already spewed liquid on his sheets. From time to time, she emits a deep gurgling that makes me suspicious. So he's already kind of thrown her aside. But then we have this paragraph right here, which I believe is the following day. Yeah. And it says, tonight, while I was getting ready to wrap the little girl in a plastic bag so I could throw her in this body of water, that's French that I won't be able to pronounce, as I am used to doing, she suddenly emitted a desperate sigh, pained prolonged, the S as in the river, whispered between her teeth as if she had already suffered some sort of intolerable sorrow over her next abandonment. An immense pity squeezed my heart. I hadn't done justice to the humble, harsh charm of this child. I threw myself to her, covered her with kisses, repentant as an unfaithful lover. I went to look for a brush in the bathroom and began styling her hair, which had become flat and broken. I rubbed her body with oils and perfumes. There's so many more quotes, and I will definitely go a little bit more into detail about how he sees dead people and things like that. But first, let's go to what actually happened and what led to him becoming a person who enjoys relations with the dead. So, one day when he was a young boy, he was pleasuring himself when his grandmother burst into the room and exclaimed that his mother had died. So from this moment on, he has kind of conflated love with death, which is already very interesting, but there is so much more to get into. And this whole video, I guess, is just us kind of looking under the surface and trying to not understand this character, because there is no understanding somebody's mindset who is like this, obviously, but just kind of analyzing his thought process and where he is and why he does what he does. There's this interesting quote in here. I mean, there's so many quotes throughout this whole thing, and hopefully this video doesn't seem too thrown together, but there's just so much to talk about. But there's this quote here that he says, "Alone we are not even the link between life and death. There is no link, for life and death are forever united, inseparable as water mixed with wine." He has some very interesting takes on death and what that actually means, and the way that he treats dead people is also, I mean, interesting to analyze in itself. He also oddly imagines other people partaking in the same interests, for lack of better words, as he has. They're not founded claims at all. There's a woman who, he's an antique salesman, and so there's a woman who comes in and remarks that this dresser looks like a coffin, and so he's like, you're one too. And then there's a couple at a funeral who he believes are there for pleasure instead of to honor the dead, and he's like, you're one of me. And then there's also a man. So Lucian takes this corpse from a grave, but he sees that a man is watching him. He freaks out and he flees the scene. And then this man ends up taking the body that he wanted for himself. He reads in the newspaper the next day that it was dismembered. And so Lucian believes that this man is one of him as well, but there's no evidence to back up claims that any of these people think the way that he does. And so it's just interesting to think of it in his perspective. I'm not really sure if he's just trying to make himself feel better, thinking that this is a normal thing and these people are like him, but he does seem to think that quite a few people throughout the text are like him. When he finds out that that corpse was taken by that other man, he says, "I burst into tears of vexation and grief." And so many times throughout this story, you're going to see words specific to the loss of a loved one, like the term grief, or do you have grief over other stuff? Okay, yeah, over an affliction or loss, sharp sorrow, painful regret. Interesting. Yeah, so I guess it's not specific to the death of someone, but that is how we use the language, certainly. So it is really interesting how he uses these terms like grief or sorrow, things that you would use to describe someone who has already passed away, for the corpses that are already dead. I think this also supports my claims further on how this helps him to cope. It's also, I think, important to point out that he never murders anyone. Not that it matters, but he's not murdering these people. He's just kind of takes the corpses. Another interesting thing to point out is that his victims, or victims in the story, are not specific to one type of person. There are small boys and girls, old women, men. There's a nun thrown in here, a baby. I mean, you've got all sorts of people. And again, you can look at this book and just from the surface level, oh, it's disturbing, that's gross, that's disgusting. But this is here, I believe, for a reason. And I think it's to show, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. So just keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to this in just a little bit. But there's just so much to get through, and I'm really excited to talk about all of this. Okay, he says this: "The time I spend with the dead, time that runs away very quickly, trying to take advantage of each second in their company." This is so important. This is so important because I think this is really the basis of the story and where I think I can find meaning from it. Because, I mean, we can go through the text and find that obviously he has issues with his mother's untimely death as a child. He uses this in a way to protect himself away from having that feeling again, and that's why he only has relations with people who are living. There's quotes in here that I interpret as him being kind of a misanthrope and separating himself from society, and we'll go into all of that. But this right here is kind of what I took away from the story. So for me, this story on the surface, yes, it's disturbing, yes, it's gross, I get it, blah, blah, blah. But for me, this is what I took away from it, is that yes, he does it in a way that's disturbing, but he really does try to use every second of time that he has with that person, knowing that it's going to end soon, right? They're already decaying, death has already come for them, and he really does try to appreciate the moments that he has with these people. And so for me, the story, under all of that disgusting stuff, it kind of is a story about appreciating the life that we have. And I think I am getting a little ahead of myself, but I think that's why nobody is spared in his victimhood, because nobody is spared of that in life. Nobody is spared of inevitable death, and we're all going to have to either deal with it, cope with it, or go through it ourselves. And so it's not something that anyone can get away with. And so if we can look at life in this kind of perspective, yes, through the telling of a disturbing book, but through this idea of we only have a limited time with everybody that we have, shouldn't we really appreciate the time that we've got? And that is kind of a beautiful sentiment through a really fucked up book. So that was my kind of takeaway from this book, and I think we'll get to other quotes about it too. But yeah, kind of interesting, right? That he maybe feels like this, like he never has enough time with people because of the death of his mother, and refuses to get close to people because he doesn't want to experience that pain again, which is something that we all can probably feel and relate to. Not what he's doing, but the reasons why he's doing it. Okay, there's this interesting quote right here. His tailor is telling him that he's suggesting a more diverse color in his wardrobe. He says he couldn't prevent himself from suggesting a less morose wardrobe for me. However elegant, black is sad. That's a quote from the tailor. Then our narrator says, and so it's the color that suits me, for I am sad. I am sad that today I must separate from those I love. I mean, he's spent his whole fucking life mourning, and he's still continuing to do that. And it's kind of an interesting thing. It's almost counterproductive what he's doing, because he doesn't want to feel the pain of loss, but he's also reaching out to people who have already been dead, you know? And so it is counterproductive in that he knows he has a limited time with these people, but also maybe that's what helps him protect himself from the feeling of loss and growing too closely to people like he did with his mother. This book is so fucking interesting to read. It's honestly one of the most interesting texts I've ever read in my life. But there are quite a few quotes that did make me laugh throughout this. I'll read a few more to you in a little bit. He also has difficulty connecting with the living. There is this one person who has tried to seduce him. Oh no, this is even before that. He says, I can't see a pretty woman or a handsome man without immediately wishing he or she was dead. And it explains when he was younger that there was this neighbor that he had a kind of a crush on. And it says, even though I wanted to, it would never have occurred to me to merely reach out and touch her hand. I waited. I wanted her dead, and the death became for me the pole around which all my thoughts gravitated. I spent hours picturing all the dangers and the ways of death that death could strike down Gabrielle, which is interesting that that's also the narrator's name. I don't know. It says from time, oh, and then he pictures her hanging herself, and that's how he is able to connect with her, because he doesn't know or is trying in some subconscious way to protect himself against being close to people. Like, how sad is this book if you actually think about it, you know? I showed you guys some quotes on Instagram, and she quotes Poe throughout this whole book, and so I do think that it's pretty obvious that she's inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's work. I mean, I'm talking, there's at least 3 or 4 references to Edgar Allan Poe in here, and one of them being the story Morella, which I thought was pretty interesting. I mean, it deals with dead people too, but I don't think that that's necessarily why that specific quote is in here. But it's just interesting because I don't hear many people quoting that story Morella, and that is the story that my cat Morella is named after. And just kind of a fun fact, it's about this really, really beautiful woman, but she's kind of like evil and creepy, and that is my cat. She is the most gorgeous cat ever, but also a little bit evil, and the name just fits her so well. Sorry, I got sidetracked a little there, but it's true. Now, there are a whole lot of interesting quotes of how this narrator talks about dead people as if they are living. He says if he does something, it will hurt us both, the dead person. Then there's this quote, Henry gave me a surprise, for the dead are full of the unexpected. Oh, then we have the quote from the young girl that I read at the very beginning of the book about how, you know, she's speaking to him essentially. He talks of Henry and says he is a brave boy, not was. He also says he finally permitted me to do some messed up stuff. Then we have Suzanne let out a light whistling that could only be described as admiring or politely ironic, a breath that seemed to not want to finish, a sweet prolonged complaint, S as in that river. So he really does talk to them as if they are alive, which is pretty interesting. I mean, this whole book is interesting. I'm gonna use the word interesting a million times. I apologize, but there's just no other way to describe this book, but it is interesting. Sorry, I'm going back and forth just to point out different things, but here he says that I have a heavy heart and that he was inundated with tears when he throws another one in the water, which again, I think is, you know, these are terms that you use with someone who has died or someone, or like an unbearable feeling towards someone, you know, inundated with tears, you have a heavy heart. So it's just interesting that he's using these for saying goodbye to someone who's already dead. He also uses the term despair. Here's where I thought maybe he was a misanthrope. There's this, I won't go out tonight, I don't want to see anyone, and I would like to have the store completely closed for the afternoon. And then you also have 32 here where he says, these comments aren't made often, but there's a few times in here he says, behind me the hostile world, cops, stupidity, hatred. And he does, I believe I read a quote later, he does talk about how being a necrophiliac is not normal. People don't accept it, it's not accepted in society, but he is so convinced that it's just destined to be that way that he doesn't necessarily go into it thinking he's doing anything wrong. You also do question a little bit if he's an unreliable narrator. She seemed to half believe me despite the strange glance she shot me. Yeah, so there are a few comments like this from his workers, the people that work with him, that you kind of get a sense that maybe there are whisperings behind his back. Maybe people have an idea of what's going on, or at least an idea that he's a strange man and that he does withdraw from the world and lock himself in his room for days or weeks at a time. Maybe not knowing what's going on, but then maybe they have an inkling of an idea, especially the people that do work for him. So yeah, you do, I think, get an unreliable narrator, but again, it's written in journal form, so how could you not? Because it's just his experience with the world, and you don't really get too many other characters, especially living characters, in this novel. Then you have this quote here. "For 14 days, I was unspeakably happy. Unspeakably, but not absolutely, because for me, joy never comes without the grief of knowing it is only ephemeral. All happiness carries with it the seed of its own end. Only death, mine, will deliver me from defeat, from the wound that time inflicts on us." This, I was like, oh, this is what the story's about. To me, this is what the story's about. It's about appreciating the little time that we have left. And for him, he sees it in a negative way, knowing that death is always around the corner and that happiness carries with it its seed of its own end. But to me, it also can be used in a powerful, uplifting way if you don't make relations with dead people and you do just enjoy the people that you have in your life, you know? So yeah, to me, I think this book does have kind of a pretty beautiful underlying message. I don't know. He also says here, the tick-tock of the pendulums, the creaking of the woodwork had adopted a particular quality, just like each time death is present. I would never have had to separate myself from her. That would have been happiness. So he is so, I mean, from trying to avoid death, he's obsessed with it. That's all he can think about. And it's even more evident in these people who are already dead, because they're even closer to, you know, decomposing than a normal person is. And yeah, it's really interesting the way that this person's brain works. He also says the words passion and grief had invaded me. Again, kind of conflating those two. He does have this paragraph here where it seems like he's describing depression. I don't bathe nor shower anymore, or shave anymore. And mirrors reflected back the image of a shaggy, livid man with sunken eyes bordered in red. He also says near him is a bottle, and enveloped in woolen blanket to ward off the cold, I imagine finding myself in my own tomb. He also says that the sounds from the outside world barely reach him. So again, just kind of like that withdrawing from everybody and really living in depression. And these brief instances with these corpses are the only thing that kind of revitalize him and make him not living in this depressed state that he is once the bodies reach a point where he knows he has to get rid of them, and then when he's without the bodies as well. Kind of interesting, really disturbing, kind of beautiful, but really interesting. So I just wrote here that maybe it's easier to grieve the already dead than experience the pain he felt with his own mother. And then this part blew my mind. I'm not gonna lie. So I told you before he's an antique dealer, and I didn't really see how that connected with his necrophilia. And I thought it was just maybe a way of him being able to see people and envisioning that they were the same, like that person who bought that drawer and thought it looked like a casket or whatever. But then this paragraph comes and it all made sense, and I was like, this writer is brilliant. He says, I don't hate my occupation. It's cadaverous ivories, it's pallet crockery, all of the goods of the dead, the furniture that they make, the tables that they painted, the glasses from which they drank when life was still sweet to them. Truly, the occupation of an antiquarian is a situation almost ideal for a necrophiliac. I think this again just further proves that he is so obsessed with death, and he just uses it as a way to be close to people, but not to be close enough to hurt himself. He uses it as a barrier between himself and other living people. I mean, this book is so interesting. Okay, we don't have too much more to get through, but there's just a few other things. Okay, so there's a scene with a nun, and I'm not going to go too into detail with this, and it's not even him that deals with the nun. He's actually witnessing someone else do this to the nun. He does find her in a casket, and he doesn't label this person as a necrophiliac either. He just says, it seems like this, because I believe it's a monk. He says it seems like he's just kind of taking an opportunity where he can get it. But here's the thing, it's not even the description, because there are a few sentences of what's going on that's disturbing. What's disturbing is this 80-year-old nun with a crown of paper roses on her head to indicate that she's a virgin. While this is going on, it talks about the noises of the rosary that the rosary is making while this is going on. And then it also talks about this crown of roses falling from this woman's head. And that imagery was so much more disturbing than any in-depth description of what was taking place. You know what I mean? Like the defilement of this 80-year-old virgin nun, just showing that from the paper crown falling from her head, to me was much more disturbing. So that's what I mean. I just think this writer has such command over the language that it's not even the descriptive parts that are disturbing. It's more of the symbolic things in here that are more disturbing. I just think this writer is amazing. The way that she writes, every word in here is meant to be in here. And there's also stuff that we're not even going to get into that you could definitely analyze further. Like I'm telling you, you could spend so long reading this book. I mean, this book is like 90 pages and it took me a solid 2 or 3 days just sitting and reading it so slowly and just trying to analyze everything out of here because there's so much in this text to get through. And yeah, it's disturbing, it's messed up, but I do think that it is quite beautiful in some ways. All right, moving along here. Let's see what we got. He says that this is where he's describing that, okay, necrophilia isn't tolerated by governments nor approved by questioning youth. Necrophiliac love, the only sort that is pure. There's also this quote here that says, I often have impressions that I'm being observed, watched, especially by service people, cleaning ladies, concierges, neighborhood merchants, and cops, of course, especially the cops. I just wanted to throw that in there. It's interesting when we get near the end of the book, but it's just kind of interesting how he believes that, I don't want you to read what I've written for my next video, but it's interesting that he believes that he's really not doing anything wrong. There's also this, I don't know what this is from or if this is true or if this was sometime in history, but it says, women of quality after their deaths are not delivered directly to embalmers, no more than very beautiful or well-renowned women. They aren't given up until after 3 or 4 days. This is done in order to avoid embalmers taking advantage of this woman. And then he says, but 3 or 4 days is so naive. I mean, that's kind of funny. You know, like it's not a funny book, but there are lines that's kind of funny. Sorry, I don't know why my dog's barking. There's also this person who tries to seduce him and he says, oh no, I'm not into that. But then in his head he said, I would love your eyes sunken in, your lips silenced, you frozen. If only you were dead. Unfortunately, you have the bad taste to be alive. That's funny. That's funny. There's some funny stuff in here. This book actually made me laugh in a few points. I hope I don't get hated for loving this book, but it really is a really fucking interesting read. He also says he falls in love each time, which is interesting, obviously. It's not love. He doesn't know what love is, but also he was so wronged by what he thought love was when he was younger that you can kind of understand his point of view. Not understand this part of it, but why he shielded himself from getting close to people. I won't say that because I don't want to give away the ending, but I will say that if you are reading this text and you do analyze it, the ending kind of wraps everything back around and brings you back to the beginning, and it's very thoughtfully written. And I love books like that. I love especially short novellas where every word is chosen for a reason, because that's how it should be. You have such minimal space to get your point across that every sentence should be perfect. And I truly, that's how I feel with this book. That it was. It is. It's amazing. Messed up, but amazing. As far as him thinking that it's okay what he does, he says that I have a tremendous reserve of calmness and aptness as soon as it's a question of carrying off a dead body. I become another person. I'm suddenly a stranger to myself, all while being more myself than ever. I stop being vulnerable. I stop being unhappy. I reach a sort of quintessence of myself. I fill the task that fate has destined for me. Interesting that you think that this is what fate wants. He just kind of accepts his impulses as normal and justifies what he does. So, all in all, I think that the beauty of this book, the beauty of the language, is equivalent to how disturbing the book is. And you guys know that I love books like that. That's why I love Clive Barker, because he has a really poetic way of describing really fucked up things. And that's exactly how this book is. And I just thought that this was brilliant. I thought it was written very beautifully. I thought that there was enough under the surface to justify the disturbing actions of our main character and what the story is actually about. I also think that there's no time in the book where anybody is questioning whether this narrator is a good person. You know what I mean? Like, I think we know he's messed up from the beginning. And although we can't justify his actions in any way, I do think that we've all probably, I'm assuming, experienced some level of grief in our life that we can kind of understand why he is so protective of his own emotions towards the living, because he doesn't want to go through that again. And I do think that it has kind of a beautiful underlying message of appreciating the little time that we have left. In the back here, it says that her prose goes far beyond mere gothic horror to explore the melancholy and the loneliest depths of the human condition, forcing readers to confront their own morality and an unprecedented intimacy. And I do think that that is true. I think that there's enough textual evidence in here to support the claim that that's why nobody gets out of his grips. Like, everybody is a victim to him. It's because nobody gets out of this alive. We're all gonna have to go through the same shit. It does make you question your own morality, and it does make you examine your life and wonder if you are appreciating the little things, the little moments, the people, how you should if you only had a limited time with them, you know? Like, are we treating people as well as Lucian treats his dead bodies? A sentence I never thought I would say, but here we are. Anyways, I hope you guys know that when I'm analyzing text like this, that, I don't know, I just can imagine some comments that are unhappy over the content of this book, especially because children are involved. And I get it, this book will not be for everyone. I'm not saying that everyone will love this, but if you love more extreme horror books, if you love books that, yeah, are just more extreme in nature and deal with more messed up topics, but you like digging under the surface and finding meanings, that can be kind of beautiful if you interpret them that way. I would highly recommend this one. I'm really interested in how you guys take this, and I've got another video coming up of some other really messed up books. So excited to share those with you. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think about this, and if there are other books that you feel are along that same wavelength that have really resonated with you. Some books that are really messed up, but also kind of beautiful in a fucked up, dark way. Let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye, guys.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.